Clara clutched the canvas bag with both hands, her fingers white from gripping it so tightly as the rancher stared at her from across the room. His voice was low, but laden with something she couldn't quite decipher. Anger, disappointment, or just weariness. "You came for the fortune, didn't you?" Like all the others, she felt her chest tighten, words caught in her throat. And for the first time since she had set foot in that immense, silent house, Clara thought of running away. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The dirt road leading to St. Sebastian Ranch seemed endless. Clara watched through the misty wagon window, seeing the fields stretch as far as the eye could see, wooden fences dividing vast pastures, cattle scattered here and there like dark dots in the green immensity. The sky was heavy, that kind of deep gray that threatened rain at any moment. She hugged the bag to her chest, feeling the worn fabric under her fingers, and took a deep breath. It wasn't the first time Clara had left everything behind. At 23, she had already seen and lived enough to know that life doesn't reserve easy paths for those born without a prominent name or a bulging purse. She had grown up in a small town in rural Appalachia, the daughter of a widowed seamstress who worked until her hands bled raw to put food on the table. Clara's mother, Mrs. Amelia, was a woman of metal, one of those who didn't complain about her lot, but faced each day with the dignity of someone who knows that honest work is worth more than any ill-gotten gain. It was Mrs. Amelia who taught Clara everything she knew, to sew stitch by stitch until her fingers were calloused, to cook with little, transforming scraps into tasty meals, to care for a house, however humble, as if it were a palace. But more important than all that, Mrs. Amelia taught her daughter to have dignity. Poor, my daughter, but never be small. Hold your head high, look people in the eye, and never accept being treated as less than you are. Clara carried those words like a charm. When her mother died, struck down by a fever that consumed her in a matter of days, Clara found herself alone in the world. She was only 19, had no close relatives, and a rented cottage she could barely afford. The neighbors were kind at first, bringing food, offering help. But kindness has an expiration date when everyone's life is already difficult enough. Clara tried to continue her mother's work, sewing for the town families, but orders were few, and the money barely covered the rent. She started taking on extra jobs, washing clothes for the more affluent families, cleaning houses, whatever came her way. But the town was small, opportunities were scarce, and men began to look at her in a way that made her uncomfortable. There was the store owner's son, who showed up one night at her door with a bottle of whiskey and ill intention. Clara locked the door and spent the night awake, listening to him bang and shout outside. There was the rich widower who offered marriage, but made it clear she would be more servant than wife, and that he had 3 children who needed a mother who knew her place. There was the old farmer who simply offered money without even bothering to pretend respect. It was becoming clear that Clara needed to leave, and that's when she saw the advertisement. It was an old newspaper, 2 weeks old. That wrapped the bread she had bought at store. Clara was at home. Unrolling the paper, she saw the printed letters. She read out of curiosity first, then out of interest, then out of widowed rancher seeks woman of good disposition for companionship and household management, offers lodging, sustenance, respect. Interested parties should send a letter to St. Sebastian Ranch, Willow Creek County. Clara read it 3 times, 4, 5. She folded the paper carefully and put it under her mattress. She spent the night awake, thinking, would it be madness to go to a ranch she had never seen, to live with a man she didn't know? But what was the alternative? Stay there, waiting for some man in the town to decide she was good for. The next morning, Clara took the cleanest paper she had, a quill pen her mother, and began to write. The letter wasn't long. Clara had no talent for pretty words, so she wrote the truth. She said she was an orphan, that she knew how to sew and cook, that she had no dowry but was willing to work. She said she needed a place where she could live with dignity, and if he was offering that, she was willing to accept. She took the letter to the store and paid the wagon driver to take it to the nearest town, where there was a post office. Then she went home and waited. A week, 2, 3. Clara was already starting to think the letter had gotten lost or that the rancher had given up on the idea when the reply arrived. It was a short letter, written in a firm, elegant hand. It simply stated the date she should be ready and that he would send a wagon to pick her up. There were no promises, no pleasantries, practical. Clara read the letter sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling slightly, and made her decision. In the following days, she sold everything she owned, her mother's furniture, the pots, the dishes, even the old loom Mrs. Amelia loved so much. She kept only her clothes, a few mementos of her mother, and a prayer book that had been in the family for generations. She put everything in a canvas bag she had sewn herself, and on the appointed day she was ready. The wagon arrived early in the morning. The driver was an old man, with gray hair and a face marked by the sun. He looked at Clara, at her small bag, and nodded in silence. Clara climbed into the wagon, sat on the hard wooden bench, and for the last time looked at the town where she had been born. She felt no sadness. She felt no longing. She felt only an immense relief at leaving. The journey lasted all day. They crossed fields, climbed hills, passed through small villages and isolated ranches. The driver was a man of few words, responding only with nods or grunts that tried to strike up. So she gave up and remained silent, watching the landscape change around her. The further they got from the town, the more beautiful the landscape became. The fields were greener, the houses better kept, the cattle fatter. Clara realized she was entering a wealthier region, where the land was fertile and the ranches prospered. This made her a little nervous. What did a rich rancher want with a poor girl like her? It was when the sun was already low on the horizon that the ranch appeared. The driver nodded. "Almost there, young lady. You can see it around the bend." Clara leaned forward, her heart pounding, and then the house appeared on a gentle hill, silhouetted against the orange sky of dusk. It was larger than any house Clara had ever seen. 2 stories, light stone walls, a red tile roof, tall, symmetrical windows. It had something of a manor, but also of a fortress, as if it had been built to last generations. An ornate iron gate marked the entrance to, and beyond it, a path of uneven stones climbed to the house, flanked by ancient trees long. Clara felt it in her chest. The house, but there was something about it that unsettled. Perhaps it was the way it stood alone on top of the hill, distant from everything and everyone. Or perhaps it was the absolute silence that seemed to envelop it, as if even the birds dared not sing nearby. The wagon stopped before the gate. The driver got down, opened the passage with the key he took in his pocket, and returned to help Clara descend. She stepped onto the uneven stone ground, feeling her legs wobbly for so many hours. She picked up her bag, thanked the driver with a nod, and began to walk toward the house. Each step echoed in the... Clara slowly climbed the path, observing everything around her. The garden was well kept, but seemed abandoned at the same time. Flowers grew, but no one arranged them. Trees provided shade, but no one rested beneath them. Everything was perfectly preserved, but lifeless. The house door opened before Clara reached it. A man appeared in the doorway, his silhouette outlined against the faint light coming from inside. Clara stopped a few feet away, her heart beating fast, and waited. He descended the 3 stone steps leading to the entrance and stopped before her. Clara observed him, trying not to appear nervous. Tall, to have been over broad shoulders, upright posture, like someone accustomed to giving orders and being. His face was marked not by ugliness, by time, slight wrinkles around his eyes, creases on his forehead, skin bronzed by long hours in the sun. His hair was dark, with graying temples combed back, and his eyes were a cold gray that seemed to see through people. He wore simple but good quality clothes, thick fabric trousers, a white linen shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, worn but well-maintained leather boots. He wore no jewelry, no ostentation, but there was something about made it clear "You are Clara." His voice was deep, controlled, without unnecessary inflection. "Yes, sir." Clara gripped her bag tighter, trying to keep her voice steady. He observed her a long moment, his eyes scanning her worn dress, her mended shawl, the small bag. There was no judgment in his gaze, only evaluation, as if he were measuring whether she was suitable. "Welcome. I am Alistair Hawthorne. Come in." He turned and went back up the steps, without looking back to... Clara took a deep breath and accompanied him. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. The entrance hall was wide, with a high ceiling that made her voice echo. The floor was dark wood, polished to a shine, reflecting the light from the iron chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. The walls were covered with old wallpaper, with discrete patterns in shades of beige and gold. Huge paintings decorated the walls, portraits of serious-faced men and women, dressed in clothes from decades past. It must be his family, Clara imagined, generations of ranchers who had lived and died in the... There was a staircase at the back of the hall, with wooden steps and an ornate banister leading to the second floor, closed doors on both sides of the hall. All dark wood with bronze doorknobs, a grandfather clock in the corner, marking the hours with a soft tick-tock that was the only sound in the... Everything was impeccable. There wasn't a speck of dust, nothing out of place, but there was also no life. No flowers, no discarded books, no signs that anyone truly inhabited that space. It was like entering a museum, beautiful but dead. Alistair led Clara to a side room. He opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The room was spacious, furnished with discreet elegance. There was a large fireplace on the back wall, unlit and clean, dark brown leather armchairs arranged in a semicircle before the fireplace, a low dark wood table in the center with an empty glass pitcher. Bookshelves lined the side walls, a large window with heavy dark green velvet curtain closed. "Sit." Alistair pointed to one of the armchairs. Clara obeyed, placing her bag at her feet and clasping her hands in her lap. Alistair stood, hands clasped behind his back, observing her with that penetrating gaze. The silence stretched. Clara began to feel uncomfortable, but forced herself to maintain an upright posture. Her eyes fixed on him. She wouldn't be intimidated. She wouldn't show weakness. Finally, Alistair, "I'll be direct with you. I've had other women here, 6, to be exact. None stayed more than a week. All found the house too isolated, too quiet, or simply didn't adapt to the way I live." He paused, his jaw tense. "I am not an easy man to live with. I spend most of the day working in the fields or in the office. I have no patience for idle chatter or beating around the bush. I don't host parties. I don't receive visitors often. I am not a man of many words. This house needs someone to care for it, to organize things, to make it feel like a home again. But it also needs someone who understands that I value silence and respect above all else." Clara stared at him, processing his words. Then she spoke, her voice firmer than she expected. "I came prepared to work, sir. I didn't come looking for luxury or an easy life. I grew up poor. I learned to make do with little. And I know the value of a roof over my head and food on the table. If you give me a chance, I promise to do my best. And I won't run away because the house is quiet or isolated. I've lived alone long enough not to be afraid of solitude." Alistair studied her for a long moment, and Clara saw something change in his gaze. A slight surprise, perhaps, or respect. She wasn't sure. "There's one more thing I need to make clear," he continued. "My wife died 7 years ago. Some people say the house is haunted by her spirit. I don't believe that. But you need to know, you'll hear rumors. I don't believe in hauntings either, sir, and rumors don't scare me." Alistair allowed himself a slight nod of approval. "Good. I'll send someone to show you to your room. Tomorrow morning, you start. The cook will explain the house route." He left the room without his footsteps echoing down the hall. Clara was left alone, her heart still racing. She looked around, old paintings on the wall, at the unlit fireplace, at the heavy silence that seemed to permeate every corner, and for the first time she allowed herself an honest, "Where have I ended up?" The cook appeared minutes later. It was a woman in her 50s, short, with gray hair pulled up in a bun so tight it pulled the skin off. Her face was round, with red cheeks and small eyes. Clara up and down with ill-disposed. She wore a stained apron over a dark dress, and her hands were large, calloused from a lifetime of labor. "Come with me." Her voice was dry, without kindness. Clara picked up her bag and followed her. They climbed the staircase, the steps creaking slightly under their weight. The upstairs hallway was similar to the one below, with the same old wallpaper, the same somber paintings, the same oppressive silence. They passed several closed doors, and Clara wondered what lay behind them. Empty rooms, furniture covered with sheets, ghosts of the past. Clara's room was at the end of the hall, away from the others. The cook opened the door and entered, lighting a lamp that was on a small table. The room was small, especially compared to the rest of a single bed against the with impeccably folded white sheets, a tall, narrow dark wood wardrobe, a small table with a basin and a pitcher of water, a simple chair. The window was small and overlooked the back of the property, where Clara could see the barn and, beyond, the darkness of the fields under the night sky. "It's here. Breakfast at 6 sharp. Don't be late." The cook turned around and left. closing the door behind her with more force than necessary. Clara was left alone. She placed her bag on the bed and sat beside it, her hands trembling slightly. She looked around at the Spartan room, at the dark window, and felt the weight of the decision she had made. She was truly here, in a strange house, with people she didn't know, in a place that seemed to hold more secrets than answers. But there was no turning back. There was nowhere to go. So Clara got up, opened her bag, and began to put her things away. She hung her dresses in the wardrobe, put her undergarments in the drawer, arranged her personal items on the small table. Her mother's prayer book lay beside the lamp, and Clara ran her fingers over the worn cover, feeling the connection to the past. Then she undressed, washed her face and hands in the basin, put on her nightgown, and lay down. The bed was firm but comfortable. The sheets smelled of soap and sunshine. Clara lay looking at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the wind blowing outside, making the windows rattle, the distant creak of the wood adjusting to the cold night, the muffled tick-tock of the clock downstairs, and then, very softly, almost imperceptibly, Clara heard footsteps, slow, measured, walking down the hall. She tensed, holding her breath. The steps approached, stopped outside her door, remained there for long seconds. Then they moved away, going down the stairs. Clara released the breath she had been holding. It must be Alistair, making his last rounds of the sleeping, or one of the staff. There was nothing sinister about it. But even so, it took her a long time to relax enough. She woke with the first light of day. There was no clock in the room, but Clara had the habit of waking early, trained by years of working with her mother, combed her hair, tied it back in a simple. She put on the cleanest dress she had, a faded but still presentable blue, tied her apron around her waist, and went downstairs. The house was silent. Clara walked through the hall, following the smell of coffee and burning wood, until she found the kitchen. It was a large room, with a huge wood-burning stove dominating one wall, shelves full of pots and pans, a long table in the center, and a window overlooking the back patio. Martha, the cook, was already there, stirring a large pot of porridge. She looked at Clara and pointed to the sink. "Wash those dishes, then sweep the parlor and the hall, and don't break anything." Clara nodded and went to work. She washed the dishes carefully, dried each one, and stacked them in the cupboard. Then she took the broom to the parlor. The sunlight was beginning to stream through the windows, illuminating the dust dancing in the air. Clara swept slowly, paying attention to every corner, moving the armchairs to clean underneath. When she finished, she returned to the kitchen. Martha had prepared a tray with coffee, bread, butter, and jam. "Take it to Mr. Hawthorne. He has breakfast in his study." Clara picked up the tray and upstairs, balancing everything carefully. The study was on the upper floor, third door to the right. She knocked lightly. "Come in." Clara opened the door and entered. The study was one of the most beautiful rooms, an entire wall covered with bookshelves filled with books, floor to ceiling. A large dark wood desk in the center with papers organized in piles, an inkwell, quill pen, an oil lamp, maps hung on the wall. A wide window overlooked the fields, offering an impressive view of the property. Alistair was sitting behind the desk, writing something in a large ledger. He looked up when Clara approached. "Good morning, sir." "Good morning." He gestured to the desk. "You can leave it there." Clara placed the tray carefully, noticing the details of the study. There was a meticulous order in everything. The books were organized by size and subject, the papers stacked with precision. Even the pen was positioned at a specific angle beside the inkwell. It was the study of a man who valued control. She turned to leave, but Alistair spoke. "Wait." Clara stopped, her heart quickening slightly. Alistair observed her for a moment, his gray eyes studying her with that uncomfortable intensity. "Do you read?" The question caught Clara off guard. She hesitated an instant, then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I taught myself." Genuinely surprised. "Yourself?" "My mother had some old books she had gotten from a mistress. I would copy the letters until I learned to put them together. Then I started reading prayers, psalms, and little by little I understood." Clara lowered her eyes, feeling her face flush. She didn't usually talk about it. Many people found it strange. A poor girl who could read. Some even distrusted it, as if it were something improper. Alistair remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on. Then he nodded. "Good to know. You may." Clara left the study, closing the door behind her. She leaned against the hallway wall for an instant, releasing the breath she had been holding. Why that question? Why did he want to know if she could read? Was it just curiosity? or was there some specific reason? She shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. Stairs. She had work to do, and couldn't waste time wondering. The following days established a routine. Clara became accustomed to the routine, to the silence of the house, to Alistair's distant presence. He was a man of rigid habits. He woke before the sun, had breakfast in his study, spent the morning working on papers, supervising the field. He ate lunch alone in the dining room, returned to his study until late afternoon, had dinner alone again, and went up to his chambers. Clara saw him little, and when she did, interaction was minimal. A nod, a good morning, nothing. But she began to notice small details that revealed the man behind the cold. The way he treated Ben with respect, always thanking him for his... The way he would stop to pet the old ranch dog, a grizzled animal with tired eyes that lived in the barn. The way he saved pieces of bread from breakfast, left them on the window for the bird. Alistair wasn't cruel. He wasn't bad. He was just lonely. And that loneliness seemed so deep, so ingrained. Clara found herself feeling sorry for him. It was on a Saturday afternoon that Clara decided to do something different. The house was clean, the day's tasks completed, and she had a few free hours. She went up to her room, took her mother's prayer book, and went down to the parlor. She sat in one of the armchairs by the fireplace and began to read. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the footsteps. She only realized she was no longer alone when a shadow fell over the page. She looked up, startled, and saw Alistair standing there, observing her. "Excuse me, sir. I didn't mean to intrude. I'll go back to my... No need." Alistair gestured for her to stay. "It's your time off. You may stay." He sat in the armchair beside her, picked up a book from the shelf, and began to read. Clara was tense, unsure how to react. But then she realized he wasn't paying attention. He was genuinely reading, absorbed in his own book. Gradually, Clara relaxed. She returned to her own reading, and the two sat there in silence, each in their own. The sun streamed through the window, creating a golden square on the floor. The clock marked the hours with its tick-tock, and for the first time since she arrived, Clara felt something akin to peace. After that day, it became a habit. On Saturday afternoons, after her tasks were done, Clara would go down to the parlor with her book, and Alistair would appear minutes later with his. They would read in silence, without talking, just sharing the space. It was strange, but also comfortable, as if each was less alone just by having someone nearby. It was during one of these afternoons that Clara noticed something. Alistair was reading, but every now and then he would look up and observe, not invasively, but curiously, as if he was trying to understand her. Once, their gazes met, and Clara blushed, quickly returning to her own reading. But she had seen something in his eyes at that instant, a question, an uncertainty, as if he also didn't know what to do with that strange situation that was developing between them. Weeks passed, and life on the ranch continued. Clara worked, observed, learned. She discovered that Martha, despite her gruffness, was an exceptional cook. She discovered that Ben had a gift with animals, calming even the wildest ones with just his voice. She discovered that Tim, the gardener, was in love with a girl from town, but didn't have the courage to ask her father for her hand. And she discovered that Jeremiah was a danger, not in an obvious way, but subtly. He manipulated situations, sowed seeds of doubt, stirred up trouble. Clara saw him doing this with Ben, suggesting to Alistair that the caretaker was stealing feed for the animals. The accusation was false, and Alistair knew it. But Jeremiah had planted the seed of suspicion. Clara began to actively avoid him. When she saw him coming, she found an excuse to leave. When he tried to strike up a conversation, she responded with monosyllable, but this only seemed to increase his interest. One morning, Clara was in the cellar organizing provisions when she heard footsteps coming down the stairs. It was Jeremiah. "Ah, there you are. I've been looking all over the house for you." Clara continued arranging the sacks of flour. Without looking, "I'm busy." "I see that." He approached, getting too close. Clara smelled hair, pomade, and sweat. A hard-working young lady. "Mr. Hawthorne, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish here." Of course. But he didn't leave. He stood there, watching, until Clara couldn't take it any more and turned to face him. "Do you need something, sir?" Jeremiah smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eye. "Just wanted to give you some advice, young lady. Don't get too attached to this. Don't delude yourself into thinking Mr. Hawthorne will look at you any other way. You're a hired hand, and you always will be. It's best to remember that." Clara felt anger, but forced herself to remain calm. "I know my place perfectly well, and I don't need advice." Jeremiah shrugged and went up the stairs, leaving Clara alone in the cellar, trembling with rage. That night, Jeremiah's words echoed in her head. Why had did he think she was trying to seduce Alice? The idea was ridiculous. Clara barely spoke to her. How could she be trying anything? But then she remembered the afternoons of reading and the glances that sometimes met. The way Alistair had started to smile slightly. She entered the study. Were these signs of something more? Or was it just cordiality? Clara shook her head, pushing the thought she was being ridiculous. Alistair was a rich, educated man of high social standing. She was a hired hand, an orphan, with nothing in the world. Even if he looked at her, which was unlikely, there could never be anything between them. The world didn't work that way. But a small part of her, a part she tried to stifle, whispered a question. What if it? Clara woke the next morning determined to forget Jeremiah's focus on work. She went down to the kitchen earlier than usual and decided to make something special. She had seen fresh yeast in the pantry and premium flour. She decided to bake bread. She lit the wood-burning oven, carefully prepared the dough, kneading it until it was elastic and soft. She left it to rest, covered with a damp cloth, while she prepared the rest of breakfast. When the dough had risen, she shaped the loaves, placed them in pans, and put them in the oven. The smell began to spread through the house, sweet, warm, inviting. It was the smell of home, of comfort, of something that house had in a long time. Martha entered the kitchen, sniffing the air, face grim. "Who told you to bake bread?" "No one. I just thought it would be nice to hash bread." But Clara noticed that she also seemed there was something in the aroma of baking. Ben appeared at the... What a good smell. "Mr. Ben." "It'll be ready soon, Mr. Ben. I'll save some loaves." The old caretaker's face lit up. "You're very kind." Even Tim, the gardener, who normally only showed up at lunchtime, arrived earlier, drawn by the smell. "Miss, if you bake bread every day, I'll work for free." Clara, feeling something warm in her chest. Perhaps this was what the house needed. Not cleaning or organizing, but life. Small gestures that would make that place less a mausoleum and more a home. When the loaves were ready, Clara took them out of the oven and placed them on the table to cool. They were golden, perfect, with a crispy crust and a soft interior. Clara separated the best one, placed it in a basket lined with a clean cloth, and took it to the study along with the rest of breakfast. She knocked on the door. "Come in." Clara entered and placed the tray on the desk. Alistair was writing something, but stopped when the smell reached him. He looked up, surprised. "You bake bread?" "Yes, sir. I thought you might enjoy fresh bread for breakfast." Alistair picked up one of the loaves, still warm, broke it in half, and tasted. Clara saw his expression. His eyes closed, and when he opened them was something different, a softness, an old wound being touched. "It's good." His voice slightly lower. Then he added, almost as if speaking to himself, "My mother used to bake bread like this every Saturday morning." Clara stood still, not knowing what to say. It was the first time Alistair had mentioned anything personal, something not related to work or the house route. It was a small but significant opening. "My mother baked bread too. She used to say the smell of baking bread of love." And for a moment, something between them, a mutual understanding, a recognition that both had lost loved ones and that both carried their grief similar. Then the moment passed. Alistair nodded, returning to his formal posture. "Thank you for the bread. May go." Clara left, but she felt something different in the air, as if a door that had been ajar had opened a little wider. From that day on, Clara began to bake bread regularly, 2-3 times a week. Each time Alistair ate, and she saw the gratitude in his eyes. Weeks turned into months. Autumn arrived, painting the fields gold. The air grew colder, and Clara began to light the parlor fireplace. Alistair started appearing earlier for their reading set, and gradually the silence between them became less heavy and more companionable. One afternoon, while they were reading, Alistair closed his book and looked at Clara. "May I ask you a question?" Clara looked up, her heart quickening slightly. "You may, sir." "Why did you agree to come here? A young woman like you could have found other options. Why did you choose an isolated ranch with a man you didn't even know?" The question was direct, but not intrusive. There was genuine curiosity in his voice. Clara thought for a moment before answering. "Because there were no other good options." "One are servant speeders. The men in my town wanted a servant disguised as a wife, and I didn't want to be treated as less than I am. When I read your advertisement, it offered respect, and that was more than anyone else was." Alistair nodded slowly, processing her answer. "And do you regret it?" Clara stared at it. "No, sir, I do not regret it. Even with the isolation, the solitude, with the lack of life. Life is here, sir. It was just sleeping, but it's waking up." Alistair looked at her for a long moment, and Clara saw something change in his face, an emotion she couldn't identify. Then he returned to his book, but Clara noticed he wasn't really reading. He was just looking at the words, lost in thought. That night, Clara had trouble sleeping. She lay in bed, looking at the ceiling, thinking about their conversation. Had it been too intimate? Had she said something wrong? Why had Alistair asked those questions? But then she remembered his gaze, the way he had looked at her when she said she didn't regret it, and a small but insistent part of her whispered, "He's starting to truly see me." Winter arrived with a vengeance. The cold cut like a knife, and the house, despite being large and well-built, had drafts that made the candles flicker. Clara started wearing shawls over her dresses and lit fireplaces in several rooms to keep the house. It was on a particularly cold morning that Alistair called Clara to his study. She went up, carrying breakfast as always, but this time he gestured for her to sit. "I need to talk to you about something important." Clara sat, her hands in her lap, her heart racing. His tone was serious, and she couldn't imagine what was coming. "You've been here almost 4 months," he began. "That's longer than any other woman has stayed, and you've transformed this house in ways I didn't think were possible." He paused, choosing. "I'm not good with people. Never have." She was the opposite. Cheerful, talkative, full of life. When she died, she took all the light from this house. I didn't know how to bring it back. Nor did I know if I wanted to offer. Clara remained silent, barely daring to breathe. Alistair continued, his gaze fixed on the window, as if it were easier to speak without looking at her. "But you didn't try to be like her. You didn't try to fill her space. You just were yourself, quiet when it was necessary, present when it was important." And little by little, the house began to breathe again. He turned to look at her, and Clara saw vulnerability in his eyes. "I wanted to thank you, and to tell you that you are not just a hired hand here. You are part of this home now, and I hope you stay." Clara felt emotion tighten her throat. "I have no plans to leave," Alistair nodded, looking relieved. "Good." He returned to his paper, indicating the conversation was over. Clara left the study with her heart still racing, processing what just heard. For the first time, Alistair had opened up, had shown what he felt, and, more importantly, he had recognized her worth. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Alistair's words echoed in her mind. He had said she was part of the home. But what exactly did that mean? Was it just gratitude from a satisfied employee, or was there something more? The following days were strange. Alistair began to act differently, not in an obvious, but small changes that Clara noticed. He started appearing in the kitchen, talking to Ben about the animals, or asking Martha about the menu. He started having dinner early, and sometimes stayed in the parlor after, reading by the waiting for Clara to appear. And Clara appeared, because now it was a habit, a silent ritual they shared. She would come down after finishing evening tasks, bring her book or some mending, and sit in the armchair beside his. They would talk, brief exchanges a day, about the staff, about the fields. Other times, they would just sit in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, full of presence. It was on one of these nights that Jeremiah appeared unexpectedly. He usually left at noon, but that night he returned with the excuse of having forgotten some papers in study. Clara and Alistair were in the parlor when he passed through the hall. Jeremiah stopped at the door, his eyes scanning the scene with an expression Clara couldn't decipher. "Sorry to interrupt. Mr. Hawthorne, I came to get some documents." Alistair there in the Jeremiah went upstairs, and Clara felt an unease in the air. There was something in the way he had looked at them, a calculation, an evaluation that made her uneasy. When he came down and left the house, Clara breathed a sigh of relief. "That man makes me nervous," she admitted, without thinking. Alistair looked up from his book. "Jeremiah, why?" Clara hesitated. She didn't want to seem like she was gossiping or causing trouble, but something inside her insisted that Alistair needed to know. He asks too many questions, and he's always watching, as if he's looking for something to use against people. Alistair frowned, thoughtful. "He's worked for me for 5 years. He's always been. I'm not questioning his. Just makes me uncomfortable." Alistair nodded slowly. "I'll pay more attention." The conversation changed, but Clara noticed that Alistair remained more thoughtful the rest of the night. When she went up to her room, he was still in the parlor, staring into the fire, lost in thought. The days grew colder, and work on the ranch became heavier. It was time to prepare the land for the next planting, to repair fences damaged by time, to care for the animals that needed extra shelter from the cold. Alistair spent more time in the fields, supervising the work, and returned home exhausted. Clara began to prepare more substantial meals, hot soups, stews, stuffed breads. She wanted to make sure he was eating well, and Alistair noticed. He always thanked her, always made some comment about how good the food was, small gestures that were building something between them. It was on a Saturday afternoon that everything changed. Clara was in the barn helping Ben organize sacks of feed when they heard shouts coming from the house. It was Martha, standing at the kitchen door, her face red, her hands trembling. "It's stolen! The late Mrs. Hawthorne's jewelry has been stolen." Clara felt her blood run cold. She dropped the sack she was carrying and ran to the house, with Ben right behind her. Alistair was already there, his face tense. "What happened?" Martha pointed. "The diamond necklace that was in the late Mrs. Hawthorne's. I went to clean the room today, as I do every month, and the case was empty." Alistair went upstairs quickly, and Clara the late wife's room was at the end of the hall. It was locked. Alistair opened it with a key he took from and entered. It was a beautiful room, preserved as if its owner might return at any moment. Elegant furniture, silk curtains, a dressing table with a mirror, and on the dressing table an open, empty. Alistair stood still, looking at tense. Clara saw the pain in his eye, the sense of being reopened like an old wound. It was the engagement, his voice low, the only thing I still had of hers. At that moment, Jeremiah appeared at the door. Clara hadn't realized he was in the house. "Mr. Hawthorne, what's wrong?" "Someone stole my wife's necklace." Jeremiah put on an exaggerated look of shock. "That's terrible. Who could have done such a thing?" Then he looked at Clara, and there was something in his gaze that made her realize he had been waiting for this. He was prepared. "Oh, it's strange." As if the jewelry disappeared now, and the only new person in the house. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't. Martha was already looking at Clara with suspicion. Alistair also turned, and Clara saw the doubt in his eyes. That hurt more than any direct accusation. "I didn't steal anything," her voice trembling. "I swear I didn't steal it." "Of course, she'll deny it," his tone feigning relief. "But let's think logic. Who else would have access to the room? Who else knows the house routine? I've never been in that room." Clara felt tears of anger and frustration burn her. "I didn't even know there was jewelry there." "The room is kept locked," Alistair said, his voice cold. "How would anyone get in without the key?" "Perhaps she made a copy," Jeremiah suggested. "Or perhaps she took yours when you weren't looking." Clara looked at Alistair, imploring him with her eyes to believe her. But he was closed off, his expression hard. "I need to think about all of you. Leave." Clara went downstairs, her legs trembling. Jeremiah walked past her with a small, knowing smile, so quick that if she had blinked, would have missed it. She saw it, and she understood. He had set her up. Somehow, he had stolen the jewelry and blamed her. But why? What did he gain from it? The answer came when she remembered the way Jeremiah had watched them in the parlor that he had seen the growing closeness between her and Alistair, and for some reason, that night, she stayed in her room, lying on the bed, tears silently streaming down. Everything she had built, all the work, was crumbling down. And the worst part was that Alistair doubted her. After everything, he still doubted her. The next morning, Clara went down to the kitchen with swollen eyes. Martha treated her coldly, avoiding eye contact. Ben was in the barn, and Clara didn't have the courage to go talk to him. She felt ashamed, even though she was innocent. She prepared breakfast mechanically and took the tray to the study. She knocked on the door, entered, placed the tray on the desk, and turned to leave without saying anything. "Clara, I don't know what to think. I want to believe you. But that jewelry was all I had of my. It was the only physical thing that connected me to feeling the pain to steal it. I swear on my mother's memory, on her soul, that I didn't steal it." "Then who was it?" Clara turned slowly, facing. She knew what she was about to say would sound like inspiration, like an attempt to shift the blame. But she couldn't stay silent. "I think it was Jeremiah, sir." "Jeremiah? Why would he do that? Doesn't want me." Clara took a step forward, the words pouring out. He always made comments, always watched me with suspicion, and that night he came back for the papers. He saw us together in the parlor. I saw his expression, sir. There was something there, something he didn't. Alistair shook his head, tired. "Those are speculation. Clara, there's no proof." "And is there proof against me?" Clara felt her voice rise, emotion overflowing. "Is there any real proof that it was me? Or is it just the fact that I'm new here, that I'm poor, that I have no one to defend me?" Alistair didn't answer. He just looked at her with an expression that mixed doubt and sadness. And Clara understood. It didn't matter what she said. It didn't matter how much she had worked or how she had cared for the house. In the end, she was just a hired hand, and hired hands didn't get the benefit of the doubt. "You may go," Alistair said, turning to the window. Clara left the study feeling something break inside her. She went up to her room, picked up her canvas bag, and began to pack her things. She wasn't going to stay in a place where she was treated like a thief. No matter how much she had come to love that house, no matter how much she had started to have feelings for Alistair, she had dignity, and dignity was the only thing no one could take from her. She packed everything carefully, folded her dresses, put away her few mementos of her mother. She picked up her prayer book and held it against her chest for a moment, asking for strength. Then she closed her bag, took one last look at the room that had been her home for 4 months. It was dawn. The house slept. Clara walked through the hall and past the parlor where had so often read with Alistair, the kitchen where she had made bread and meals with love, and she exited through the back, closing it softly. The night Clara began to walk down the dirt with her heavy bag and tears streaming down her. She didn't look. She couldn't. If she looked, she knew she wouldn't have the strength to continue, so she just walked, one step after another, moving away from the only house where she had felt at home. Clara walked all night. Her feet ached. Her hands were numb from carrying the bag. She kept going. She needed to put distance between herself and the ranch, between herself and the pain. When the sun rose, painting the sky pink and orange, she was far away, very far away. She arrived in the town, had grown up in the middle of the morning. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The same humble houses, the same dirt streets, the same people with their simple lives. It seemed as if she had traveled back in time, returning to the starting point. As if the past few months she looked for the owner of the boarding house where she had lived before, a widow named Mrs. Teresa. The woman was surprised to see her. "Clara, I thought you were at that rich ranch. It didn't work out without. Do you still have that small room for rent?" Mrs. Teresa nodded. "Yes, I do. But the rent has gone up." Clara paid the first month with the money she had saved, went up to the tiny room at the back of the boarding house, and closed the door. Then, finally, she allowed herself to break down. She sat on the floor, her back against the wall, and cried. She cried for the injustice, for the false accusation, for the way Alistair had doubted her. But more than anything, she cried for the loss, because at some point, without realizing it, she had begun to love that, and she had begun to love the man. The days that followed were the most difficult of Clara's life. She tried to return to her old routine, sewing to earn a living, but her hands trembled, her concentration failed, and she ended up redoing the same work several times. The nights were worse. She lay in the narrow bed, looking at the cracked ceiling, and thought of, was he dining alone? Was he reading in the parlor? Feeling her absent, or had he simply moved on, hiring another helper to replace her? 3 days after her departure, Clara was sewing by the boarding-house door, enjoying the sunlight, when she heard the sound of horse hooves. She looked up and saw a rider coming up the street. Her heart stopped. She recognized who it was. Alistair. He dismounted in front of the boarding-house, tied his horse to the post, and walked towards Clara. He was wearing the same clothes he wore to work in the fields, his boots muddy, his hair disheveled by the wind. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days. "You came," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I found out who stole the jewelry," Alistair said without preamble. His voice was rough, laden with emotion. "It was Jeremiah." Clara dropped her sewing. How did you find out?" Alistair ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "You left. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about Jeremiah. He treated you. So I started investigating. I went through the ledgers, receipts, everything, and I found discrepancies, figures that didn't add up, missing supplies, money that had been siphoned off." His jaw. "I confronted Jeremiah. At first, he denied everything, but when I threatened to call the sheriff, he confessed. He had been stealing from the ranch for months, small amounts that I didn't know. When he saw that you were getting close to me, he was afraid that I would give you more responsibilities, that you would discover what he was doing. So he took the jewelry and blamed you, hoping I would send you." Clara felt a wave of emotion, relief that her innocence had been proven, anger at having been used, and a deep sadness for all that had been lost. "Kyo? Where is the—" He hadn't, was hidden, it covered it. Alistair took a step forward, and Clara saw guilt and Clara. I should have beginning. I knew you. I knew the kind of person you, but I let pain and distrust." He extended his hand, hesitant, as if unsure if he had the right. "I came to ask you to come back, not as a hired hand, never again as a hired hand. I came to ask you to marry me." The world seemed to stop. Clara stared at him, unable to process his words. Marry? Was he asking her to marry him? I know it's crazy, he continued, the words flowing quickly, as if he had rehearsed but was improvising at the same time. I know we barely know each other. I know I'm older, that I'm difficult, that I carry a heavy past. But in these days, without you, I realized something. I realized that the house is nothing without you. I realized that I am nothing without you. You brought light back into my life, Clara, and I don't want to let that light escape again. Clara felt tears stream down her face. They weren't tears but of something complex, a mixture of joy, fear, hope. But I'm poor. I have no dowry, no family. I have nothing. Alistair shook his head. Now he was so close that Clara could see the golden flame, could see the vulnerability etched. You have everything that mattered. Kindness, dignity, strength, transformed a dead house to a living home. You made me want to smile again, to talk. That's worth more than it. He took her, Clara, the firmness, the promise. Marry me, Clara, not out of obligation, not out of convenience, but because you want to, because you feel something for me, even if it's just a little of what I feel for you. Clara looked at this man who had seemed so cold, so distant on the first day, and she saw him for who he truly was now. She saw the loneliness, the pain for the fear of opening his heart again. But she also saw the courage he was showing now, the way he was laying himself bare, risking rejection. And Clara realized that yes, she did feel something for him, something that had grown slowly in the shared silences, in the cups of tea drunk side by, in the glances that crossed over. It wasn't a burning passion, the kind of love in novels, but it was real. It was deep. I'll come back. Her voice firm despite her tears. I'll marry you. The relief that swept over Alistair's face was so intense that Clara almost laughed. He pulled her into an embrace, and for the first time she felt his body completely relax. There was no more tension, no more distance. There were just two human beings meeting, recognizing each other, choosing each other. The wedding was simple. They were married in the small-town church, with the local pastor officiating. Ben was a witness, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. Mrs. Teresa and some women from the town attended, curious to see the orphan girl marry the rich rancher. When the pastor declared them husband and wife, Alistair held Clara's face in his hands and kissed her. It was not a passionate, but tender, full of. They returned to the ranch in the wagon, side by side, their hands intertwined. When the house appeared on the top of the hill, Clara felt emotion tighten her throat. She was returning as its mistress. Ben had decorated the entrance with wildflowers, and even Martha was there, without her usual grim expression. She nodded at Clara, a silent. Alistair led Clara to the master. She hesitated at the door, but he squeezed her hand. It's our room now. The past is past. You are my present and my future. That night, Alistair told her about his first wife, about the illness that took her, leaving him alone. I thought I would never feel anything again, but you proved me wrong. You showed me that it's possible to start. Clara snuggled to start anew together. Clara embraced her role as mistress of the house. She hired another helper, rearranged some rooms, brought more light and life. She opened windows closed for years, filled the house with fresh flowers. The ranch began to change. Ben started smiling more. Martha became sometimes even humming. Even the old dog started spending more time in the house, lying at Clara's. Alistair changed even more. He smiled, laughed, talked about feelings and dreams. He started coming home earlier from the fields, eager to have dinner with Clara, to sit in the parlor, to share the day. It was on a spring morning that Clara woke up feeling nauseous. Alistair was worried, but Clara smiled. No need for a doctor. I think I'm expecting a baby. Alice went through several expressions: surprise, fear, and then pure joy. He picked her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing. We're going to have a baby. The pregnancy was uneventful. Ben built a wooden cradle with his own hands. Martha knitted blankets and clothes. Clara and Alistair transformed one of the rooms into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow, filling it with wooden toys. On a summer night, Clara felt the first contractions. The labor was long, but when the baby's cry finally echoed through the house, everything was worth it. It was a girl, small but healthy, with dark hair and eyes that promised to be as light as her father's. Alistair entered hesitantly, but when he saw his daughter, his face filled with tears. She's perfect. What shall we name her? Clara asked. Amelia, after your mother. So she will always be present. Clara felt tears stream down her face. It was the perfect way to honor the woman who had given her so much. The following years were the happiest of Clara's life. Amelia grew up strong and healthy, a cheerful girl who explored every corner of the ranch. She had her father's light eyes, but her mother's determined spirit. When Amelia was 2, Michael arrived, and 2 years later, Sophia. The house overflowed with life. Children's laughter echoed through the halls, toys scattered across the parlor, little feet running up and down the stairs. Alistair proved to be a dedicated father. He taught his children to ride horses, took them to explore the fields, told stories before bed. It was common to find him on the parlor floor, playing with wooden blocks, or in the garden, teaching the children to identify plants. The ranch prospered. Alistair hired a new, honest administrator and spent more time with his family. The children grew up. Amelia became an intelligent young woman who wanted to study. Michael was quiet and thoughtful, dreaming of becoming a teacher. Sophia was pure joy. With a talent for music, Alistair and Clara grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming wrinkled, but their love remained firm. They still sat together in the parlor in the evenings to talk, laugh, reminisce. Amelia married and gave them 3 grandchildren. Michael returned from the city with his wife and 2 children. Sophia took care of the house, filling everything with music. One autumn afternoon, now old, they sat on the porch, watching their grandchildren play in the garden. "Do you regret it?" Alistair. Clara looked at him, at the man who had been her salvation, her companion, her love. She looked at the house they had transformed together, at the children and grandchildren who were their legacy. Not for a second, not for a single. Alistair smiled. He kissed her hand, a gesture he had made thousands of times, but which never lost its meaning. "I love you. I love you too." A love that had grown slowly, that had been tested and proven. A true. They stayed there, hand in hand, watching the sun set over the fields. The house behind them was full of light and light, of music, and when night fell, Clara closed her eyes and gave thanks for the courage she had, for the home she found, for the man she loved, for the family she built, for the life and she felt, deep in her soul, she was exactly where she was always meant to be. If this story touched your heart to touch mine in the telling, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new stories. In the comments, tell me, do you believe true love can blossom in the most unexpected places, that even in the most difficult situations, when we remain true to who we are, life rewards us? Share your opinion, your stories, reflection. Until the next journey, and may you always have the courage to follow your heart.